All right, I think I'll get started here. We're at 12 o'clock. Thank you everyone for joining me today. I'm Chelsea Cunningham. I'm a Programs and Engagement Manager here at SHRF. I'm gonna kind of walk through most of the relevant information for applying for the Research Connections Truth in Action program today. Before I jump into the agenda, I just want to acknowledge that here in Saskatoon, we're on Treaty 6 territory. Just wanted to pay respects and acknowledge our relations here on this land and encourage everyone to think about what reconciliation means to them as well. So our agenda for today, I'll introduce SHRF and who we are for those that aren't familiar. I'll also talk a little bit about knowledge mobilization to provide some context of why we're offering this program. We'll go over the opportunity details, eligibility, the application process, how they're reviewed and what we look for in the applications, the important dates, and then finally there'll be a couple last piece of advice and an opportunity to ask any questions you have. In the webinar format, I think questions have to be entered through the question or the chat box. I don't believe participants are able to unmute and ask questions, but I'll keep an eye as I go if there's any relevant questions, or we'll answer them all at the end. So first, who is SHRF? We are the provincial agency responsible for funding, supporting, and promoting the impact of health research that matters to Saskatchewan. So we're an arm's length government agency. Our funding comes through Innovation Saskatchewan. And then we take that funding and distribute it through our various research programs. Our strategic goals are to strengthen research capacity and competitiveness, increase investment in research and innovation, and align research with stakeholders' needs. And part of this is making sure that research knowledge is actually able to be used and helping people. And that's where our Research Connections program comes in. So just a quick overview of this program. It aims to increase the health research relevance, usability, and uptake. And we do this by providing funding for knowledge mobilization activities that are targeted at non-academic mediums or settings. So this is one of our few competitions that isn't peer reviewed. It's reviewed internally by SHRF. And that also opens up the eligibility to applicants outside of the post-secondary institutions. But I'll touch on that a bit more detail later on in these slides. And then next I'll introduce what knowledge mobilization actually is, what we're trying to fund through this program. So the definition of knowledge mobilization is kind of long. So it's defined as a dynamic and iterative process that includes synthesis, dissemination, exchange, and application of knowledge to improve the health of Canadians, provide more effective health services, and strengthen the healthcare system. So all of these activities listed, the synthesis, exchange, application, they're all part of the knowledge mobilization process. And it's also sometimes referred to as knowledge translation. We use mobilization because translation as the definition can feel a little bit more linear, where you're taking knowledge and translating it to another point. Whereas mobilization is a dynamic and iterative process, as mentioned in the definition. To sum this up quite nicely though, the Canadian Institute of Health Research defines Indigenous knowledge translation as sharing what we know about living a good life. And so I used a lot more words in the last slide, but that really is the essence of what we're trying to do. So we're just taking knowledge that exists, whether research-based, traditional knowledge, and sharing it to those who can use it. That kind of already touched on this a bit of what is knowledge. So there's research-based knowledge that is informed by scientific research activities. There's also traditional knowledge that refers to the knowledge systems embedded in the cultural traditions of Indigenous communities. And both of those can be used in these applications. And then, so why do we need knowledge mobilization? There's definitely a significant gap between the knowledge available, things that we know, and the use of that knowledge in many fields. So understanding and building on the many sources of knowledge is necessary to fill in the gaps in our of our knowledge as a society about health and how we can use that to improve. And then, so we'll get into the specifics of the application here. So I already touched on the purpose of the Research Connections program to increase health knowledge, relevance, usability, and uptake. Specifically, this program supports short-term targeted initiatives that are sharing or mobilizing knowledge. And they should have a practical application for Saskatchewan knowledge users. Knowledge users we use as a fairly broad term. It just refers to any individuals or organizations that are likely to be able to use the knowledge to make informed decisions about their health policies, programs, or practices, whether at an individual level, for their family, for their service provider, or government. And then the specific objectives of this call for the Truth in Action are to facilitate the sharing of health knowledge in non-academic mediums or settings, and also address any of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to actions. So the sharing, the focus should be improving one of those calls to action. And we also want to see that projects are being guided by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous individuals, just to ensure that both sides are being represented appropriately. The value and duration, we have up to $10,000 available per application. Matching contributions are not required, but they are encouraged to be listed if you have them, especially if it's an ambitious project that requires a lot of outside resources to be completed. That really helps us see the feasibility of the project, knowing that you have those additional supports in place. And the grant term is for up to 1 year. So this is more for new initiatives, not normal day-to-day operating costs for anything ongoing. And then, so eligibility of who can apply. So an application needs a principal applicant who is responsible for the project and meeting all SHRF policies. And that individual has to be from either an institution that has a memorandum of understanding with SHRF, which are the institutions listed across the bottom, including the post-secondaries and the health authority. Or for Research Connections, it can be an individual from a CRA registered charity that has a vested interest in health in Saskatchewan. And then there's no minimum team requirements officially, just that somewhere in the project team, you have to have both Indigenous and non-Indigenous individuals or perspectives represented. Eligible activities is also kept very broad. We're leaving it to the experts in these fields to tell us what they think people need to see, what should be shared and how. The main things we want to see is that the activity clearly supports the program purpose and objectives. We want to be able to see how the team includes the required perspectives and also how they've addressed equity, diversity, and inclusion. We want to see that it's based on legitimate and vetted knowledge, research, or traditional or otherwise. And we also want to see that there's concrete deliverables listed in the application. So that kind of is provided through the timeline. They'll ask for a one-page timeline. And we want to see that within the year, you're able to produce something concrete even whether that's a meeting, etc., and how you're going to measure your success. Principal applicants, I should mention, can only submit one application per call, but they can be co-applicants on other applications. And then the full requirements are found in the application package. So that will be your main resource for figuring out if activities are eligible or not. But then we're also always around if you have an idea, but you're not sure it fits. I'm always able to kind of listen to the idea and see what we think. Some examples of eligible activities that we've seen in the past. So there's been reports developed to inform policy, development of educational resources or translations, a lot of outreach activities to connect the target knowledge users and individuals with already existing resources that maybe aren't well known or aren't the easiest to access. We've also seen groups compile perspectives and lived experiences to share stories and kind of share knowledge in that form. And we've also seen development of tech solutions to improve access to resources and care. So some specific examples I pulled out. We've had videos about access to food in the city compared to traditional Indigenous forms. And then we also had a couple films that are, I think they're still in progress right now, but they're aiming to develop 3 short films about gendered violence and healings, sharing individuals' own stories that they were excited to share and wanted to help other people through their own story. And then we also had culturally responsive training. So this one, they were training peer mentors who could then help others with their same lived experience navigate the healthcare system and resources and all of that. And so then into the application requirements themselves, there are some rules around expenses as what's allowable and what's not. So as a general rule, expenses should be clearly justified and cover only the direct costs. SHRF doesn't usually pay for any overhead costs, that kind of thing. We are publicly funded, so we do look that cost-efficient options are used. And equipment is not normally an eligible expense unless it has prior approval from SHRF. We do have the SHRF funding guide, which has a little bit more policies and explains the allowable expenses. But again, we're also here for questions as well. And SHRF does reserve the right to partially fund projects. If we review the project and we really like the application, but there's an ineligible expense in there, we may come back to you and ask if there's another option or just say that we're not able to fund that specific portion. The application process itself is done through our online research management system. The application package at the end does have a section for the specific instructions that helps navigate through the different parts of the online system. There are also some YouTube videos that we have that show like what the web page looks like and where the different buttons and all that are. Or again, SHRF is always here if you're having any difficulties with it. Any applicants from CRA registered charities will have to contact us to set up their organization in the system beforehand, unless you've already worked with SHRF. And that can just be done by emailing us the name of your organization and your registration ID number. We have, already touched on the funding guides and the YouTube videos. The YouTube videos, they are written out as well in an RMS researcher manual. It has screenshots and all that, so you can navigate to the section you need and take a look. Those are all found in our website at shrf.ca under resources. And then the final part of the program is the review process once the applications are all submitted and in. These are reviewed by an internal SHRF committee, guided by expert external reviews. Again, because we're not experts in most of these fields, so we do consult with some other people that have experience working in the field and may have experience knowing like what was successful in trying to carry out the knowledge mobilization, and may have tips for success even. As a general rule, what we're looking for is really just reflecting the requirements for an eligible activity. We want to see the activity is clear and well defined. So we have to be able to know what you are actually doing with the proposal. We want to see that it's aligned with the purpose and objectives. And so that would be, we want to see why you're doing it. We also want to see it promotes the engagement of different perspectives. We do want to see that you've considered the ethics around any engagement with Indigenous communities. I think it's OCAP training and the Tri-Policy Council statement on Chapter 9 with Indigenous communities. Those should be considered if you're a researcher carrying out this work. We want to see the outcomes are clearly outlined. So that's producing the timely concrete deliverables. Those are kind of tied together. So we want to know what you're doing. We want to know what the end product will be or what the end goal is and how you will know you have achieved that goal. And then we'll also be looking at the budget, that it's fiscally responsible and justified. And these are outlined in a little bit more detail in the application package as well. Important dates, so the application deadline is October 25th. The online system will close at 4:30 p.m. So applications need to be submitted by then, or we need to have received an email from you saying that you tried to submit and the application, if something weird's happened, it's okay, we can fix it, but just make sure you've reached out by 4:30 p.m. so that we know that it's a technical issue and not just a missed deadline. The funding decisions will be done for December 14th, we're aiming, and then that will have a funding start date of January 1st. So general tips that apply to most SHRF programs, including this one. Make sure you read the application package. There's a lot of questions that can be answered doing that. But we realize that it is a very long document and there's a lot of information thrown in there. So if you're having trouble deciphering something, not sure what it means, can't find the specific question you have, you can always just email us. It's always a good idea to start the application early. If you're formally inviting any co-applicants to the application through the RMS, those are sent by email and they need to be accepted prior to submission, or the application won't let you submit at deadline. Make sure that you've thought through your budget. There's sometimes where we read a proposal and a budget, and some of the budget items we can't tell exactly why they're there. So just make sure the budget items are reflected in the activities so that we can kind of match them between and be like, oh yes, they are paying someone to do this, which is mentioned over here in the proposal. And most importantly, just be clear on the proposal and how it relates to Saskatchewan and knowledge users. So just really make sure the who, what, why, how, and when comes through the proposal. There's no formatting rules on this application in terms of like sections or styles, but we have seen it works fairly well to break it into those sections individually, the who, what, why, how, and when, with the when being the timeline that will be required in the package. That's just a one-page document saying like, okay, this is when we expect each deliverable to be achieved. And then, yeah, we have our contact information here. So there's myself, the program manager. You can email me any questions about eligibility, program guidelines, etc. If you are having any trouble with the RMS or need to get your organization registered, Tanya is our go-to expert about that. She's great, and she's able to fix many, many issues that come up. And so I think that's all I have for prepared information. If there's any questions, please drop them in the chat or the question and answer box, and I can answer them. And if there aren't any further questions, thank you for signing on today. And I hope this was helpful. This will be recorded and shared online as well. So if there's anything you need to go back and check, or if you had colleagues that weren't able to make it today, they're still able to see this information as well. So thank you again.